Welcome, 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 welcome. My name is Jared Coseglia. I'm the CEO and founder of True Staffing Partners. I'm joined here by the amazing Senior Vice President of Account Management and Recruitment, Jess Barre. Jess, say hello to all of our folks joining us today.
Hey everyone, I know many of you out there excited to meet the fresh faces. I'm based out of Atlanta. I help lead our data privacy function at True. And Jared and I are really excited to, in the spirit of the Olympics, let's take our resumes to a perfect 10.
There we go. So this is the first of its kind resume clinic for data privacy professionals of any amount of experience, whether you're entry level or you're seasoned in your career. These tips are really applicable for everybody, and they are largely very specific to people who are looking to have careers in data privacy and protection. So with no further ado, since we've only got 29 minutes to go through all this amazing data, let's kick it off. So here are a couple pretty pictures of me and Jess. We could go through those pretty quickly. There we are. Don't we look nice? Jess, let's do a little icebreaker with fact or myth. We're going to play a little game here about resumes, fact or myth. And behind the scenes, just so everyone knows, we have the amazing Katie Player, who works with us here at True as a recruiting coordinator and much more. Jess, fact or myth? Hiring managers only read the first 3/4 of the first page of a resume and glance at the rest.
That is a fact. That is something that, so a lot of these fact or myths, these are going to be surrounding how resumes are physically viewed, right? And so maximizing and putting the punchiest, most salient pieces up at the top of your resume, high value.
Number 2, fact or myth, hiring managers will only spend about 7 to 15 seconds looking at a resume.
Sorry, I know that's a very sobering statistic. However, it is true. And that it really stinks when you think about the hours that we spend, really pouring ourselves into perfecting our resume. But that's a very valuable statistic to keep in mind, and the right pair of glasses to kind of put on when you're working on your resume. You need to maximize visual readability, right? At a glance, I need to be able to glean information from your resume that tells me who you are and what you're about and where your skills lie.
Number 3, always include a cover letter with any of your submissions with a resume.
Myth.
Jess?
Myth. Cover letters are starting to go the way of the dodo for a couple of reasons. Number one, no one wants to read them. But number two is it takes more time. And additionally, the cover letters are if one is not asked for, a cover letter is an opportunity to open yourself up to criticism. And if you do not have a perfect cover, if you have a perfect resume and then have typos in your cover letter, or improper usage, things like that, that's going to set your candidacy back, not propel it forward. My guidance is only include a cover letter when it is specifically asked for by an employer.
Number 4, resumes should be no longer than 1 page. Fact or myth, Jess?
That's a myth. That is a myth. Your resume should be long enough to showcase your talent in a salient, meaningful way without being too lengthy. I cannot imagine a whole lot of circumstances where it's appropriate to go beyond a 3rd page, certainly. However, unless you're super, super junior in your career, going into a 2nd page is completely appropriate.
We like to say 1 page is usually not enough, and more than 3 pages is too many.
Too many.
How many years of experience you have.
Correct. Some of that is know thyself, right? If you are a very senior player, if you bleed a little into a 3rd page, completely fine. If you're a couple years out of school and only have a couple years of work experience, you probably don't even need to even go into a 2nd page. And I would say 80% of folks probably fall somewhere in the middle, that they're going to be in the 2-page range.
Last up, fact or myth, using attention-grabbing fonts, charts, and colors will enhance appeal of my resume. I'll throw on adding your picture too to your resume might enhance the visual appeal. Fact or myth?
That's a myth. Readability is important. A lot of organizations are also using AI to take a first glance at resumes. AI struggles to read as well. Crazy colors, fonts, charts, infographics, things like that. So some of that valuable data might be lost. Photos specifically, I say no to. I realize that in other parts of the world, like the standard is putting a photo on there. You don't want to open yourself up to anything. So my suggestion is a black and white resume, professionally formatted, straightforward. That also allows your reader, going back to that second factor myth, to glean more information in a short amount of time.
Cool. Great tips. Let's get into our top 10, Jess, that are very specific things for privacy professionals to think about when they're either crafting a resume or they are enhancing a resume. Often we find a lot of privacy professionals haven't updated their resume, maybe 5, 6, 10, 15 years. And so it feels like they're starting from scratch. Let's walk through the top 10.
So summary versus objective. We want an executive summary or a professional summary at the top of your resume, not an objective. Your objective is to get a job. That's understood. That is something that we don't need to repeat by virtue of you having an application out there. Your objective is getting a new job. So the summary should be a brief, punchy intro that pulls the reader in. About 3 sentences is great, certainly no more than 5 sentences. And that should be information that is not regurgitated somewhere else in your resume. This should be something that sets you apart. It's also going to be the way that you are adding value to the business, like your unique value prop to the business that might not be caught in specific data points. That's going to be a summary of the type of folks you influence, the stakeholders you work with. And just like a flyover of your level of accomplishments. Yeah. So a punchy, brief executive summary or professional summary, depending on your seniority level, is much more appropriate. Something else that I think is very important to say about the summary versus objective is over positioning yourself can be just as dangerous as under positioning yourself. So if you are applying for a privacy analyst position, you don't want to make your summary look like you're a senior executive, and vice versa. You want to appropriately position your summary to the leveling of the type of position you're applying for.
Maybe a slight nuance to take that a layer deeper, Jess, that I think we run into more frequently are the differences between individual contributors and managers and leaders. Meaning there are a lot of very experienced, we'll call them executives, maybe they're not executives, maybe they're more program managers, directors, who find themselves in a position where they're applying for a role that may not be leveraging all the same assets and skills that they have in their responsibility skill set in their current job. For example, they may be moving from a role where they're highly managerial into a role where they're more strategic consultative. And if you're starting your summary by saying seasoned people manager, having managed teams of 50 to 60 people plus, you're sort of setting yourself up for failure for the job you're applying for that's more individual contributor. And we see that example a lot. I think a quick checklist that just kind of went over, but a good to recap for everybody, is that summary should say what your subject matter expertise is, what stakeholders you're managing down or influencing up, how you're impacting the business, and then what your unique value proposition is that can't be described in a chronology of skills and experiences, right? Things like servant leader, things like leads with a culture of kindness, things like a dual mentor and manager, right? Those kind of words that evoke emotion are important for setting the tone for how a hiring manager will read the rest of the resume. So it's setting up, not just detail, but also feeling as well, and the kind of feeling that you want the person to read the rest of your candidacy with. Jess, anything else before we move on?
An analogy that I like to use is a great summary is like an awesome trailer to a movie. It is what sucks you in and makes you excited to learn more.
Yeah, and good trailers make you feel very quickly.
Exactly.
Number 2.
Talk to us about chronology, Jared.
Yeah. So a couple of basics that don't specifically relate to privacy, and then we'll kind of whittle down. The first of which is everything's got to be in reverse chronology, meaning your resume should start with what your most recent position is and work its way backward. Katie, let's go to our before resume. We've got a good before and after resume to show everybody. Let's look at some of the chronology mistakes here that are being made on this before resume. If you'll scroll down, here you'll see under innovative advisories, I think the first kind of bullet here, all of this, yeah, you can kind of highlight all that for us so that we can draw everybody's awareness to the chronology here. A couple of just typos, right? And we see this literally 5 times a day. You'll see here under innovative advisories, they've got a dash that's a small dash between 2022 and present, but then they've got a long dash on the next one. They've got months spelled out in one, but they've got abbreviations in another. They've got a slash on one. And usually what this is a result of are people who are updating their resumes when they get that new job, and they're not taking the time to uniform everything into the same formatting in terms of chronology. And I'll tell you, we get comments from this from hiring managers all the time, which is why we correct it now all the time, because it really irks people. It looks careless. It looks sloppy. The other thing that we're going to talk about a little bit later is how to frame things when you're a contractor, but it's also really important that if you've been under a logo, for example, let's say you worked at Mandiant and you got absorbed by Google. Now you've worked at Mandiant for 8 years and now you've been at Google for another 5, but you've listed them as 2 separate employers. We actually recommend that you don't do that. We actually recommend that you put Mandiant/Google from the day you started to present, and then show separate dates for when you worked for those employers to avoid confusion that you might have less tenure in your current role or your current company than you actually do. And look, in privacy, we haven't seen the volume of mergers and acquisitions in the software consulting service provider community that we have, say, in cybersecurity or in e-discovery, which are our other 2 core verticals here at True. We've seen so much consolidation in those industries that sometimes someone gets a job 1 year and 4 years later, they've been through, 2 or 3 acquisitions potentially. Now, when you spell all that out on a resume, one way to deter hiring managers is for it to falsely look like you've changed jobs every 18 to 24 months when really your company's just been acquired and absorbed into a new one. Distinguishing that is really important. The same applies to contractors in putting a period of time in which you were contracting and doing multiple assignments and what those dates were. And we'll explore that later, but it's the same basic principle. Katie, can we just flash over to the good resume, the after resume, to show people exactly what we mean here? So you can see here, we've got very clear dates in which the person was promoted in this first role, right? They were started as an analyst, so we know that they got promoted. And had they just listed all the dates from 2021 to present and didn't show us the separate dates, we wouldn't know that they got promoted. And showing that you've actually been promoted with date changes and title changes signals to a hiring manager that you're somebody of greater value, who's won the affections of the business and been elevated as a result. And everybody wants to hire people who are promoted and elevated. That's just kind of basic, common sense. If we scroll down a little bit, you'll see we've done the same thing here for some contracting roles. We've listed the entire range in which they contracted, which is almost a 5-year tenure, and then shown the 2 separate contracts that they held during that time. This kind of attention to detail in your chronology, whether it's typos, the order of things, separating things, whether it's because of acquisition or because of contracting roles, is really critical, because what it does is it takes the mystery out of what you were doing, when you were doing it, and in what modality from a staffing perspective. What you don't want to spend your time on an interview doing is explaining everything that I just explained instead of diving into the substance of your knowledge-based expertise and professional ambitions.
Jared, your guidance is month and year, correct?
My guidance is always month and year. I think to the day is probably unnecessary, because you're more likely to get it wrong than you are right, and then it could create issues on a background check. Nobody's going to really have issue with months, but to the year is not enough.
Too
Right?
ambiguous.
It's too ambiguous, right? And in a background check, they're going to need it at least to the month. So you might as well do that homework, make sure you've got all that accurate on your resume. Yeah. All right, number 3.
Terrific. Number 3 is regulatory footprint. So the regulatory footprint is something that I will repeat throughout the presentation, and that anyone who has talked to me about their resume can probably hear me echoing it in their head. You want to use terms of art, and this is the key place in which you can do so. So terms of art are crucial. We need to talk about, so regulatory footprint does not just mean the geographic footprint. It includes that, but it is not limited to that. So go ahead, Jared. You
Do we
look
have
like
a
you have a
breakaway
question.
slide for this?
Beg your pardon?
Do we have a breakaway slide for this?
We do not.
Okay, sorry.
Yes. So that could be, so in regulatory footprint, you want to include the geographies, you want to include the regulations themselves, and you want to include the frameworks under which you work. NIST, High Trust, ISO 27001. You were responsible for EMEA. So you want to talk about GDPR. You were responsible for, South America. You want to talk about LGPD. APAC, you want to talk about PIPL, things like that, that showcase A, that you're flexing on the terms of art, and B, you're very clear about where your prowess lies.
Yeah, these buzzwords are really important. We have a saying here about SEO for resumes, and part of your SEO for resumes is having these regulatory frameworks clearly spelled out on your resume, both as acronyms and fully spelled out, so that they're getting picked up in search terms for either recruiters or in-house recruiters that are looking for talent.
One thing to note on that point, Jared, is the acronyms are very important. I have plenty of folks who only want to spell them out to make it seem more flowery or sophisticated. That's going back to that 7 to 15 second stat. You want the acronyms because your eyes are pulled to that.
It's a great point. Number 4, Katie. Compliance versus business impact. So what we often find is that people's resumes talk about what they were asked to do in the job, as opposed to what they actually did in the job. And those are two usually very different things, right? We're going to talk about your resume not reading like a job description and what it should read like, but this is part of that. And I think it's easy for privacy professionals to very quickly talk about all the regulatory and compliance work that they've done, all the frameworks, all the stuff that Jess just mentioned, but sometimes don't make deliberate connections, whether it's with KPIs or anecdotal connections about how they've moved the business. How did you work with marketing to enable different business units to contact more potential customers in a compliant way that then led to a spike in online sales 60 days later? What different things have you done that don't justify your existence through we didn't get hit with a fine? Because privacy right now, whether it's entry level, early career, mid-career, or seasoned executive, are looking for people to connect those dots, right? How do issuances in legislation or in litigation lead to potential risks that might affect the company you're interviewing for? What might those potential business impacts be that prohibit the business from being able to use data the way that they've been using it traditionally? Those kinds of connections are really important to draw on your resume. And most privacy professionals are actually doing those things. And when we say to them, well, what about this? What about that? They've got great stories, but they're not putting it on their resume because it is not as formulaic as that regulatory footprint. Connecting those dots, vitally important. Jess, anything to add to that bullet point? I feel like we coach people on that a lot.
Yes, we certainly do, but I think you covered it perfectly.
Number 5.
Talking tech. So talking about tech goes back to that terms of art conversation, right? We want to make sure whether you are in a technical, operational, or legal role, we know that a hallmark of a privacy professional is being a Swiss Army knife and wearing multiple hats. So being able to talk about the tech tools that you leverage and what you leverage them for is crucial. In column 1 on the left, you'll see the type of language you want to use on your resume when discussing the ways in which you deploy and leverage tech within your privacy program. And column 2 are perhaps the ways that the technology is used and the areas for which it is used. You also want to name drop the actual proper name of the tools you're using: OneTrust, Big ID, etc. You want to name drop the names of those tools, but you want to be more specific than that. Let's use OneTrust as an example. If you just say proficient in OneTrust, that does not tell me nearly enough. Correct. Do you have an enterprise-wide instance? Do you own it? Did you implement it? Are you just using a cookie consent module? What is the degree to which you're troubleshooting it in-house versus outsourcing? Is it out of the box? Is it a custom, instance? Being able to speak fluently but concisely about all of those things in a resume setting allows in an interview for you to go deeper.
I think also the order of things in this first column is really important. And let's take AI as an example, right? There's a lot less proven, tested technology in AI that's commoditized the industry the way OneTrust sort of has, right? So when you're talking about AI, if you're an AI governance professional that comes from privacy and you're saying to yourself, well, how do I talk about it? First, you should talk about, well, what are you doing to explore different technologies? Then what are you doing to evangelize them internally? How are you gaining adoption? Then are you getting adoption and buy-in? Are you actually institutionalizing them? What are you doing to make them work? How is it customizing? What were the outcomes as the result of implementing that technology that led to efficiencies? And how are you tracking metrics and holding yourself accountable and the business accountable for using that tech and getting utilization and value out of it, right? We cut one of our tips, which is using power verbs. Here are some really strong power verbs for you to use on a resume to talk about and use as the catalyst for explaining what you've done with technology, right? It's a great checklist for everybody to think about including, and it should come in this order because this is the order in which technology is integrated into a business. First, you explore it, and then in the end, you're holding yourself in the business and accountable for its results. Anything else on this topic, Jess?
No, emphatically agree.
Great. Let's go on to, I believe, number 6 is funneling, right? Yeah,
sure
funneling
is.
skills. So this one we do have another graphic for, and this one is really, really important, right? So the order of things on your resume should be in order of sophistication. So if you're doing strategic initiatives, if you're managing teams of people, that should generally be at the top of your chronology, and then move in this descending order: strategic, managerial, consultative, operational, technical, tactical, administrative. We've seen some managers who spend 60% of their time consulting, talking about all the paperwork they have to do as the first bullet point of their resume. And what that signals to a hiring manager is you spend most of your time doing this thing that's at the top of your resume, and it takes up the most of your time, and that's why it's at the top. So you want to organize things in a way that, yeah, this takes up the most of my time, but it's not the most sophisticated skill and probably is not what I want to be doing. So I'm going to order things not only in what is the volume of time spent, but also what is the way in which things enter the business and enter my purview. And usually it starts with strategy and ends with technical administrative. A couple of quick bullets on the side too here that we want to outline, which are other ways to funnel your resume. One, as we discussed, is volume of time spent, with the stuff at the top that takes the most amount of time. Lead with what you're applying for is another way to funnel things in, like funneling, meaning what order should I put my skills in? Another one is lead with what you're applying for. If you're applying for a leadership job, you want your leadership jobs at the top. If you're applying for a job that's highly consultative and is not going to be managing people, you don't want to lead with your managing people skills. And then the last being lead with what you're going to tell stories about. So on an interview, if somebody sees something at the top that is a clear demonstrative example of something historical that happened in your work history, that's something they're going to probably unpack. You've listed it at the top. It's front and center. This is what the candidate wants to talk about. And a lot of hiring managers will lead with that as a way to get the conversation going and see how you articulate your experiences. Jess, anything to add on this one?
One thing that I will add is just because you don't manage people does not mean you do not have ownership, which is a perfect segue into number 7 on our top 10, which is milestones, metrics, and KPIs. Your resume, if you can take anything away, my advice is your resume should read like a list of accomplishments, not like your job description. People want to know what you've done, not just what you know. And if you are more junior in your career, that does not mean that you don't have as much to say. If you have ownership over a process, that is still ownership. You do not have to be managing people to have ownership and to have strategy. And, the milestones and KPIs and things like that can feel a little tricky at first blush in privacy because so much of success in a privacy program is about what doesn't happen. However, there are still absolutely plenty of ways that you can set yourself apart. So, for example, led your organization to achieve high trust compliance, right? Or NIST, or implemented a NIST framework, or ISO 27001, et cetera. Or, perhaps you contributed meaningfully or led your organization through a successful audit after an incident, right? And so the ability to showcase what you have accomplished and what you have done is infinitely more valuable than hey, I have this knowledge. Now, if you're on the very front end of your career trying to break into privacy, yeah, you have to rely on what you know. And what you know is flexing on your certifications and your investment in yourself.
I mean, yeah, Jess, but I think also like entry level people could say things that are milestones, like was the first person hired by the organization that had no experience in privacy to come in and learn the business as an intern and grow. Well, that says a lot. Like they could have hired a lot of people,
Or if you're in a non-privacy role, put on your resume, I raised my hand to be a privacy champion, to liaise with my non-privacy team, as sort of your foot in the door to show your personal investment into yourself. Organizations want to hire people and invest in people who invest in themselves and take that initiative.
We've got 3 minutes, Jess, so we're going to move through the last 3 bullets rather swiftly. We've sort of already done the last one, so I know we'll save some time there. Cross-function discipline. The short of this is if you're working with CISOs, if you're working with marketing, if you're working with finance, if you're working privacy, unlike a lot of other verticals inside corporate America, touches all parts of the business. You've got to talk about all the cross-discipline, all the interdisciplinary, multi-function stakeholders that you're working with and how you're impacting their day-to-day lives. That is really important. People want to see that they're hiring somebody that has evangelism capabilities, and talking about your interdisciplinary cross-functionality is the best way to do that.
That's also what we call being multilingual. And being able to speak the language of legal to legal, being able to translate that to tech teams, being able to, then regurgitate that to marketing in a way that they will catch the vision and understand.
Jess, I want to use our last minute or two for you and Katie to go through the before and after resumes faster than anyone's going to be able to absorb in the 60 seconds you're going to do. Show them all the mistakes and all the fixes that we've had, and we'll wrap up there.
We'll hit the highlight reel. So as far as proofreading matters, and in a tight job market like we're in now, that will make or break a position. One of my personal pet peeves is when open prose is in all caps. You can see that in the before version with this at the top. It is not readable, that it is difficult to read. Education, bump that to the bottom. I want to know what you've done. I don't want to know where you went to school. That's far less important if I'm just glancing at a resume. If you look at this innovative advisory group, resumes are more readable when they are in bullet format. Bullets should not have periods at the end unless it is a complete sentence. When in doubt, leave it out. It's like a comma in a sentence or clothes in the dryer. When in doubt, leave it out. Another thing to be cognizant of is making sure, see how on this one licensure and certifications is hanging at the bottom, and then the actual information for it is on the next page. You also want to watch formatting consistencies and spelling tool names correctly. You would be shocked at the number of resumes we see where proper nouns within the privacy world, the terms of art that we were talking about, are misspelled. Additionally, speaking of capitalization or misspellings, Privacy as a standalone word is not capitalized. I see executives do that. I see entry-level folks do that. It's an easy thing to avoid. So I would say those are my, top 5 or so on proofreading. And then if you just cut really, really quickly, Katie, to the better resume, you can see that all of that is corrected here. We have punchy words, we have bullets, we have formatting that is reasonable. We're using the terms of art, and we're using the acronyms. Jared, you're on mute.
Well, that was bound to happen at least once. So we've got one question I want to answer. This is all great information. If there's anybody that wants a copy of these fake resumes, these are totally fake. We made them. They're not anybody's real resume. If anyone wants a copy of the fake resumes, we can send them to you. We'd be happy to. We want to open it up to a few questions. We've got a few more minutes. We had one question of how should concurrent positions appear? In other words, board roles, side work. It's a great question because it should not appear in your work chronology if you are not being paid for it. For example, if you are on multiple boards or you're doing volunteer work, that should have a separate section that should be down at the bottom of your resume near education. That's our guidance for people on things that overlap. What happens if you start putting like, this thing and this thing, and they both say from whatever date to present? It starts looking like, oh, did they make a mistake? Were they in this job and then they forgot to update their resume and put an end date? And now you're getting into clarifying things, and you've created mystery instead of spelling things out really clearly. I think when people look at chronology, they're expecting that to be the work that you're being paid for as a working privacy professional. And if there's volunteerism or board stuff, which is, has some monetary compensation sometimes, but isn't your primary focus, it should be separate, right? You also want your future employer to know that you consider it separate and that those things are not going to take priority over your employment, and doing that separately in your resume reinforces that assumption. How do resumes compare to LinkedIn? More relaxed on LinkedIn, the same, etc.? Jess, you want to take that one?
I generally think that your resume should almost mirror your LinkedIn. If, as a recruiter, recruiters leverage their own version of resume to search for candidates. You want to be findable on there. So, for example, if you have experience with China's PIPL regulation, I want to see PIPL on your LinkedIn, because that way you're findable for a search that involves that information.
I also think the thing we've seen undo people in the interview process is when there are inconsistencies between your LinkedIn profile or your resume. And it could be as small as a month of employment. Like your resume said you stopped working there in October, but your LinkedIn profile says you stopped working there in August. Well, which is it? And now we're spending time unpacking that instead of learning about how great you are for the job. So inconsistencies can be a death nail on LinkedIn. We've got a few more questions. Jess, I'm comfortable sticking around for a few more minutes.
I can stick around. I've got time.
Is it better to submit resumes in Word or in PDF? Jess, you want to take that one?
An excellent recruiter will not ask you for a Word version of your resume. They will be able to edit it themselves. That said, with a recruiter that you trust, send a Word version, because it just saves a little time if we have any back and forth or any tightening up to do. When applying for a resume, AI is getting a lot better at reading a PDF than it did even a few years ago. So I wouldn't hesitate to apply if you're applying blindly, like online. I wouldn't hesitate to use a PDF resume because you want to try and keep things tight.
Yeah, I think when you're working with an agency and they're going to be helping you edit it and help putting their watermark on it, which we do, and removing your personal information from the resume, it is a shortcut to send us a Word doc, although we can do it with the PDF just fine. When you're sending a resume to an actual employer, I'm of the mind, Jess, that it should be a PDF, just because you want to ensure that the formatting is locked. Sometimes when you send things in Word, little like formatting things like the title with the content on the next page, that example you gave, I see that happen all the time, that because somebody's got a different version of Word, you don't know. I think PDF is the safest way to ensure the formatting errors are not sent in error.
Completely agree.
All right, last question we're going to take, and then we're going to say goodbye to everybody. You guys have been an amazing, wonderful, engaged audience, and my marketing team is going to write down all the names of the people that want a copy of those resumes in the chat. Thank you in advance. Last question. How do you portray non-privacy legal roles, tech, transaction, compliance that you had before pivoting to privacy? Jess?
They should still be on there. You absolutely should not leave them off completely. However, you're just devoting less real estate to them. The concepts of primacy and recency are very important. If it is less relevant to the role, you should spend less time discussing it on your resume. However, you shouldn't eliminate it completely because things like that will pop on a background check, and you don't want to create mystery, and you certainly don't want to create ambiguity.
Jess, I'm giving everyone your email address. I hope you don't mind. We're trying to write down everyone's email as quickly as we can in this chat, but we've added Jess's. It's jess@trustaffingpartners.com. You can certainly get in touch with Jess, and Jess will make sure you get a copy of any of the material that we presented today. We'll also send out an email blast to everybody that was on this, probably giving it to you so you've got it.
Yes.
Here are some additional resources for everybody. Maybe we'll start putting the fake resumes up as a resource too for people, since that seems to be in high popular demand. If you haven't read our 2024 jobs report, I highly recommend you do. Those stats are starting to change, and we update those stats every month on our Eye on Privacy monthly webinar. We have another one coming up at the end of August. We're also starting to do a quarterly series with Transcend and the amazing and infamous Ron DeJesus. He's incredible, and he and I are going to co-host a quarterly series specifically talking about AI's impact on the privacy job market and on careers within the vertical. If you haven't taken our OneTrust skills assessment, we've actually developed it. It often accompanies resumes and goes over every module and allows candidates to score their confidence in all of those different modules. It's a really great value add. If you're a job seeker working with us, check it out. Jess, I'm going to give you the final word and final thought and just say thank you, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate you sticking on a little bit past the half hour. And last thought goes to you, Jess.
Absolutely. Also, if you have not seen our 2024 data privacy jobs report, it is chock full of valuable info that will help influence your resume. Thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to continuing to work together. Have a great day, everyone.